Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Renee Classell, clinical psychologist and coach, and this is Couch Confessions. So welcome back, and if you're new here, Couch Confessions is where I share a little bit about what's happening on the couch, both professionally and personally. And I do it every Sunday, or try to do it every Sunday. So today we're going to talk about ghosting. But ghosting with a twist. So I feel like that came up this week in some of my sessions. And I want to explore a little bit like why people ghost, because it's so painful, or just disappear. But more importantly, how we ghost ourselves. So I think that's really what I'm going to focus on. And believe it or not, this came up for me this week because I have this mantra that I tell my clients and I tell myself all the time. And the mantra is, do not self-betray, right? Do not self-betray. It's like the mantra I live by. But I want to talk about that in terms of ghosting ourselves. Because at times, a lot of the times, it's very challenging not to self-betray. So for me, it always happens around getting sick and I guess being a little bit of a workaholic. But so about 2 weeks ago, I got a really bad stomach bug. And the crazy thing is I was continuing to do my client sessions. Like I literally was bent over, hunched over, stomach in knots, in pain, trying to continue with sessions. And I kept saying like, oh, this will pass, it'll pass, it'll pass. And then I happened to look at my cell phone and I looked at the Aura, for the app for my Aura ring, and it said your body is showing major signs of distress. I was like, oh, okay, so this isn't going to pass. I'm sick. And it wasn't until then that I gave myself permission to like really be sick and cancel my sessions for the week, which was so painful because I don't know. I don't like canceling. So, which I guess is another thing to talk about. Like, why can't we just sit still and rest, right? Like, we always, if you're like me, you always need to be doing the things and you feel guilty when, God forbid, you have to rest, especially because you're sick. And then that leads into, I think, how we ghost ourselves or self-betray and don't show up for ourselves. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why we may ghost others. So I guess the title of this Couch Confessions is Ghosting, Guilt, and I don't know, why we can't sit still. That sounds like a good title. So, I want to begin the conversation with just talking about, I think, ghosting others and why we disappear on other people, or why it hurts so much when people disappear on us or ghost us. So let's start with why do people ghost us? And I, as a therapist and an individual human being, I've been on both sides of it, right? And so I've been on the side of people who have ghosted others and been on the side of people who have been ghosted. And it's funny because I feel like ghosting is one of those things that really hits your heart for several reasons, right? They leave you hanging. Like, you don't have closure. You're wondering what's going on. It's just not a nice feeling. And I think people automatically start to think, what did I do? So yeah, I would say it's this disappearing act that hurts more than I think people like to admit. But when you talk to people who ghost, there's usually a reason why they ghosted. And a lot of the times it has nothing to do with you. That's what I found. So, like ghosting, like you're vibing with someone, a friend, a date, even someone at work, and then they're gone. Like no call, no text, no explanation, and it really does sting. And again, I think it stings so much because what ghosting really triggers is confusion. right? And remember, I always say the brain doesn't like confusion. The brain likes predictability. And so, this confusion, it's a mix of like rejection and unfinished business, and it pokes at your self-worth. And a lot of people need that closure, and it turns into people pleasing, but also overthinking. Like, you start to spiral because, again, the brain likes predictability. And when the brain can't put the pieces of the puzzle together, like what happened, what was wrong, did I say something wrong, should I have done something differently, was I too much, was I not enough? Like, when the brain can't put the pieces of the puzzle together, you start to overthink trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But what I tell my clients and myself is that even though it's hard to see at the time, a lot of time, most of the time, ghosting isn't about you. It really isn't. So you're overthinking something that there is no answer. And the truth is, sometimes people just don't know how to be honest. Sometimes they can't hold the emotional weight of a goodbye. And excuse me, sometimes they're just, I really think, trying to disappear from their own lives. And you, the person who got ghosted, gets caught in the fallout of that. So let's talk a little bit about that. I don't know, are you guys aware that there really are some people who want to disappear from their own lives? I bet that's something you never considered when you've been ghosted, especially if the person has shown up before and smiles and like laughing and a good time. Considering that they really might want to disappear from their own lives is something you might not think about. I remember once years ago, I ghosted a really, really close friend. I have to say, it still haunts me today, right? Because I ruined this friendship. It was a very special friendship, and I ruined it because I ghosted. But it was a time when I really wanted to disappear from life. I couldn't show up for myself. So this was years ago when my father died, and it was the first parent death I had gone through, and really the first death experience that I had as an adult. And I did not handle it well. And my girlfriend, we were really close. We always went out like every weekend. She kept calling me to be supportive, and I would just never answer the phone and never call back. And even as I was doing that, I felt horrible, but I just couldn't talk. Like, I was in so much grief. I could not face my life, and I couldn't talk. And then as more time passed, it just became awkward, like too awkward to call. I didn't have an explanation. And then when I finally did call, like, it was too late. The damage had been done. I had hurt her so much. And then, I had a client. I'm going to tell you another story. I had a client, I'm going to call her Tasha. She had been friends with someone, like, I think she had known maybe 6 or 7 years. And one day they were talking about planning a trip. Excited. And then radio silence. And this client would come to sessions, and like, she spiraled for a week or so, mainly because she didn't know what happened. Like, is my friend okay? What happened? And then, she found her own resolve and closure. And then when her friend finally did reconnect, she said, I'm sorry, I was going through a really dark time, and I felt ashamed, and I didn't want to bring anyone else down. Ghosting always doesn't mean I don't care. Sometimes it means I don't know how to care for myself, so I can't show up for you either. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. And that doesn't make it okay. I'm not trying to do therapy speak and say that makes it okay, because it doesn't, but it does make it human, right? And then, I think it makes it human. We all try to do better, right? And then there's this thing I call micro ghosting. And let's be honest, this is something I think we all have done when you're kind of just like not in the mood. I know I still do this. Have you ever like left a text on read for way too long, and then now it feels awkward to respond or to reply? Or someone reaches out and you genuinely don't want to engage with them, but instead of saying that in a nice way or a diplomatic way. You just vanish. I call that micro ghosting. But it's like we ghost to avoid confrontation. We ghost when we feel overwhelmed and we want to avoid those emotionally overwhelming feelings. We ghost when we don't know how to set boundaries with words, so we use absence as a shield. And so a lot of times I think that what drives ghosting is just flat out avoidance, right? Just avoiding. Yeah. And then, okay, so speaking of avoidance, I want to talk a little bit about avoiding, like staying busy to avoid life. Like, I'd rather be exhausted and overscheduled than feel my feelings, right? Like people who fill their calendars and say yes to everything and start projects we can't finish. Also, we don't have to sit alone with the parts of ourselves that feel unworthy, right? And that's ghosting yourself. So I used to have a client years ago who would say, I hate having an empty day. And when I asked why, she was like, it makes me feel like I don't matter, right? Like, just let that sit for a second. What if you did have an empty day? What would you think about? Would you be forced to feel? I feel like we've been sold this lie in society that value equals output, and that if you're not doing something productive, you're failing. So then how do we respond to that? We stay busy, we burn out, we ghost ourselves, we don't show up for ourselves. We don't have the capacity to be real with people. So we ghost them. First we ghost us. And everyone ends up walking around wounded, pretending they're fine when we're not, right? So like me, hunched over, in pain doing client sessions, I was ghosting myself when I wasn't fine. I needed permission to take a rest. So sometimes we avoid, I think, the hard conversations with our own soul. We ignore our need for rest and for softness and peace. And we betray our boundaries because we don't want to disappoint anyone else or feel like we're not being productive. So I feel like this Couch Confessions is just like an invitation from me, also to me, to, rest. If you're tired, rest. If you're not feeling that connection with someone, say it with compassion. If you've been ghosted, don't let it define your worth, because it's probably not about you at all. And if you've ghosted someone, maybe it's time to apologize or at least acknowledge it to yourself, right? And so as we gear up for the summer season, let the summer be the season you show up for you first, gently, honestly, and without having to perform. Don't ghost you. And you don't have to earn your rest, right? You don't have to explain your boundaries. You have to be compassionate, right? But you don't have to explain your boundaries. And you definitely don't have to chase people who have made it clear they don't have space for you right now. So I guess this Couch Confessions is about just taking care of your peace. And whatever that means for you, if it means doing less, if it says saying less, if it means saying less, if it means being still, that's not lazy, that's healing. Of course, my dog, the little one that I always tell you guys I have to put him in my lap. I found a hack around that. I just let him sit on the couch next to me. As long as he can see me, he's okay. But of course, now he wants to bark at the people jogging outside on this beautiful day. So I think that is my cue to wrap up Couch Confessions. And remember, don't ghost anyone else, but first and foremost, don't ghost yourself. All right, guys, that's Couch Confessions this week. I'll see you back here next Sunday. Bye.